Hey guys, the title says it all. Diablo 4 is going to be 227% better in the next patch. That's coming on the 17th of October. This list will obviously be very subjective, but I'm going to go through it and show you what I got. So basically, I went through and I gave a percentage increase to every single thing in the patch notes. So new unique items, I put that at 4.25, etc., etc. And based off of that, the total we got is 227.75%. And that's not counting anything that's class specific, which, these are 36%, 44%, 71%, 51%, and 36% for the different classes. And on top of that, I did not include any of the Season of Blood specific mechanics, the vampiric powers, or any of that stuff. So, with that in mind, let's go through some of the patch notes, and I'll show you the ones that I rated as the biggest changes. So I'm probably going to do anything that's like 5 and above. I'll just kind of ignore the rest of it. Search options for the stash. Now you can go into your stash and you can click specific buttons to sort your stash and find the items you're looking for. That is pretty damn big, especially for someone like me, because I would constantly gridlock myself and I'd be sitting there like, okay, well, what can I get rid of? Let's sit here and meticulously go through this awful, chaotic mess. And another aid to that is the better item sorting that we've got here. So the better item sorting, it's going to arrange your items based off of the aspects and the affixes on them. Next up, we've got the enchanting cost reduction. This is a massive reduction in the cost for enchanting, and this multiplies with other increases to gold and things that they added to the game. But basically, rather than scaling up to infinity and spending 20 million to try and reroll something, now it's much more reasonable. Next, gems don't drop. You don't get full gems that drop on the ground. You get gem fragments. They drop as a material that goes into your materials tab. It gets picked up automatically. It doesn't take up inventory space. And when you want to craft a gem, you'll go and craft it. If you decide you don't want that gem anymore, you can salvage it. I guess that's one of the ones I rated a little bit lower, but it kind of falls into the same category. Next up, item power adjustments up to 925. Just more power in the game. I've always enjoyed the power creep and having like a new thing to try and get to, so just having that higher power to get to is nice. But the big part of it is that item power scales with player level. So what happens with this, there is a range that's like 75 across, and depending on the player level, you have a range around your player level. So obviously, once you get to a certain level, you'll start getting 925 items at the high end. And then as you get into like higher nightmare dungeons and whatnot, you'll be able to increase that lower end and eventually have a tiny little window that you can get items from, and that's going to make it much nicer for the whole leveling process. You're not going to hit level 70, find an item that is really good, and then not replace it for 30 levels and, however long past that point you go. So that's a really nice change. This one I rated even higher. So world tier 3 and 4. You're no longer going to get white items. You're not going to get blue items. If you're in world tier 3, you're going to get sacred only. If you're in world tier 4, you're going to get ancestral only. This is a massive boon to just quality of life in the game. I cannot tell you how bad I am at not picking up junk. I pick up, I'll pick up all the gems, I'll pick up all the whites and blues. I can't help myself. And so not having whites and blues filling your inventory anymore, not having sacreds filling your inventory anymore, it's just a massive improvement, and I can't wait for this. And this is also going to help me stop gridlocking myself with the storage. So there's multiple quality of life things when it comes to inventory space, and I can't be more excited about it. I will mention this one. I rated it at a 4, but teleporting to nightmare dungeons takes you directly into the dungeon. That just saves us a loading screen, and if you're doing a lot of nightmare dungeons, that is a lot of loading screens, so I'm really glad they did this one. Yeah, I'm going to do some of these 4s here. What other fours did I have up here? We've got mini map zoomed out, so just more to see on the mini map. That's pretty nice. We've got Nightmare Dungeon affix changes, so things like backstab, reduced crits, pretty much any annoying affix that you'd get on one of your Nightmare Dungeon sigils is now just way less annoying. They basically changed almost all of them, and that's a really nice thing because there were a lot of them that were just like, why am I getting hit by this drifting shade every like 2 seconds? And now it's much more spread out than that. They did dungeon layout improvements and quality of life changes. So now you'll have a more streamlined approach to going through dungeons. You won't, go down a dead end for 10 minutes and then go all the way back down and then go to the boss room and then realize you missed one little spot off to the side. They tried to improve a lot of that and removed a bunch of objectives and stuff, so that's really good. They reduced the spawn time of world bosses by about half. They put better rewards on them, and they're stronger now. And even the stronger thing, some people might not like that, but I actually think that's a good thing because they're basically loot pinatas that weren't that good of loot, you know? So now, a little more challenge, but better rewards, so I'm excited for that. Whispers, quality of life improvements, more gold, and gem fragments. Okay, yeah, so for the Whispers, it's now easier to complete the Whispers objectives. They did some quality of life stuff there. But they also did a few other things, like when you grab your Whispers cache, you're guaranteed to get the items that actually come with it and not a bunch of random stuff. They come with an absurd amount of gold, apparently, and you also get more gem fragments from that than other things. So that's going to be a good source of gems as well. They did mount improvements across the board. It's just the horses in the game are terrible, or were terrible, are terrible. Yeah, they're still terrible, but they are making them significantly better going into season 2, and I doubt there's really going to be that much to complain about, even if there are some minor things that are still there. Cooldowns were reduced on the mounting, dismounting. The mount can charge through barricades. You get a longer duration on your uptime for when you sprint. Just a lot of good changes. Oh, and the one really annoying thing with mounts, where if you were on mouse and keyboard and you had your mouse near the horse, you wouldn't run very fast at all. They have adjusted it. They should have gotten rid of it completely, but they adjusted it so that you don't have to go as far to get that increased speed. In addition, they raised the base speed of the horse by like 14%, I think it was, or something like that. What else we got? Monster scale with the player. They actually scale past 75 now in the overworld. So when you are playing in the overworld right now, if you are past level 75, you won't be getting much experience because the monsters don't scale with you. So now, if you go past level 75, the monster will scale with you all the way up to 100 in the overworld. There's experience improvements, more experience from monsters in higher world tiers, more experience from whispers, more experience from Helltide chests. Yeah, a lot of good experience improvements there. Honestly, this is probably too low of a rating. They also changed experience to be multiplicative with bonuses from being in a party or using blasts, and they added experience gain to incense, so there's a lot of options there for experience gain, and the math works out better. All renown rewards persist between seasonal characters. No more doing your renown over and over and over again. This is like, I don't even know how many hours, 10 hours that you're saving every season. So this is a great change. I don't know why this wasn't in for season 1, but it's a really good change. Event monster density increase and speed of progression. So during the events that you'd run into in dungeons and whatnot, events in general, you would run into situations where you'd be sitting at an event and you'd be standing around waiting for monsters to spawn. They never spawned. They finally spawn, and they're like, all right, is this even worth it? And it wasn't. They also increased the density of the monsters. So this is a great change so that you actually feel like you want to do events. And combining this with the fact that the NPCs in the higher tiers don't die as easily, you'll actually be able to complete those events without failing because they randomly got one shot. Unique item improvements. There were a lot of changes to uniques. I put this pretty low, honestly, compared to what it actually probably is. But I didn't want to go too crazy with high percentages. I basically lowballed everything in here. Resistance is fixed. This is a big one. I think it adds a lot of, maybe not a lot of, but it definitely adds depth to building a character, because before it was just stack armor, stack armor, stack armor. Now you have to kind of do that little bit of a balancing act or puzzle where you have to get the right amount of resistances while also making sure you have enough armor. And you can also have situations like the bosses that they add to the game, which are also not included in this list, but are a great thing for the game. Those bosses have specific damage types, so you're going to use specific resistances for them, which might mean using a potion or even possibly changing your build straight up for them. In line with that, armor is physical reduction only now. They buffed disobedience and all of the other stats you get on armor, so that's really good. I definitely prefer it that way so that it's not the one size fits all thing. So this one is debatable on whether or not everyone likes it, but I think it's actually a really good change to the game. So what they did was they changed the damage buckets in the game. If you don't understand what damage buckets are, basically you have different damage types in different little groups or buckets, and each bucket is multiplied by the other bucket. So vulnerable was a bucket, critical damage was a bucket, and any of the different buckets would multiply together and you'd get crazy damage numbers. Now they've put a cap on the different multiplicative parts of those stats. So critical damage caps out at 50% for the multiplicative and the rest becomes additive. And vulnerable caps out at 20% and the rest becomes additive. This means you aren't really going to want to stack vulnerable or critical damage because with the way it works now, you may as well go for things that aren't situational based. You know, when you're doing critical damage, you have to land a critical hit to get that multiplier. If you're doing vulnerable, you have to make sure the enemy's vulnerable to get that multiplier. Whereas there are other damage types, like damage to close enemies, that have a bigger range. So on an item, you're going to get a bigger percentage. And it's not a bad situational one because you can basically guarantee with certain builds that enemies are close, or guarantee with certain builds that you're crowd controlling the enemy or slowing them or whatever thing you're going for. There are good options. Of course, you can't slow a boss or crowd control a boss, so there's other things that come into play. But long story short, vulnerable and critical damage were nerfed heavily. Overpower was buffed pretty heavily. And in general, this is going to end up meaning a lot more classes can participate in the meta. And it also seems like a huge buff to dot builds. Everything else down here, just bug fixes and whatnot, is pretty small stuff. There are quite a few things here. If you ever want to pause the video and go through the patch notes, I have them in order so that you can actually see whatever you're wanting to look at and compare it with the patch notes. But the rest of the big changes are to the classes themselves. Huge. Let's look at some of the outliers here. So for Druid, the Paragon changes were the most impactful. For the Barbarian, the Paragon changes were the most impactful. For the Necro, skill changes were the most impactful, but Paragon were pretty impactful too. Let's see. Nothing really too impactful for the Rogue, but still quite a few changes on every class. And then for the Sork, a massive amount of Paragon changes. So yeah, lots of stuff there, and the Sork got a ton of bug fixes. I don't know what was going on there. I don't play Sork, but it was a lot. I hope you guys found this video interesting. If you like this, I might do more like this in the future, but I really wanted to do this one specifically because there were just so many changes, and I really want people who are questioning whether or not it's worth coming back to Diablo to have a better idea of where the game is at. Um, Again, this isn't including the new bosses, the new seasonal content. If you weren't here for season 1, there were a ton of positive changes there. Oh, and I forgot. This is a big one. Bulwark was nerfed on the druid. So now the unkillable, way overpowered damage ability is no more. It'll be used for defensive reasons, and that's about it. Maybe damage, but I don't think anybody really cares about the damage anymore. So I hope you guys join me in the game on the 17th, and I'll be streaming and everything, so I'll see you there. Daddy Druid out of here.